You're listening to this week's episode of the Vacation Rental Business in Today's World podcast. You're about to start transforming your business and life with the information found here. We interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in the vacation short-term rental industry and supporting businesses. The information found here is a combination of brain science, transformational thinking, safety and loss prevention, and vacation short-term rental knowledge and experiences, all rolled into one to help you and your business to achieve levels you never thought possible. I am glad you are here, and now please welcome your host, Eric Thibodeau.
Hello, everyone. We're back, and today we have Dr. Mike, who's a subject matter expert in fire protection, safety, and loss prevention. Welcome, Dr. Mike.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, Eric.
Great, thanks. We appreciate you joining us today. And can you give us a little bit of introduction, idea of your background and experiences?
Yeah, well, I'm a fire protection engineer by training. I was also a former professor, department head of the School of Fire Protection and Safety at Oklahoma State University. I currently sit on the Scientific Technical Advisory Committee of the World Trade Center Health Program, which monitors essentially the health of those that were involved in 9/11 in New York, in Manhattan, in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon. And essentially that program follows them and provides medical care to those folks for the rest of their lives. And there's about 500,000 people in that program. I also previously served on the NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health Board of Scientific Counselors, which is, the research arm of the federal government involving occupational safety and health. I currently am a partner in a consulting firm where we do fire protection, safety, and loss prevention or loss control engineering services. And we help clients of all types. And in doing that, I end up getting involved in forensic investigations, including forensic investigations that happen in residences and multifamily buildings and things like that. So that's what I'm all about, and look forward to speaking with you. Great,
thanks. I appreciate it. So you've had quite a bit of experience and work in basically safety and loss prevention. Just a general question. When we want to talk about what is being proactive. We talk about being proactive in safety and loss prevention. How would you describe being proactive?
Being proactive means that you're actively seeking to prevent accidents rather than reacting to an accident once it occurs. So being mindful of potential dangers and hazards and things that could happen, and then trying to address those in advance to prevent something from happening later.
Great. Yeah. And so what we're trying to do in this summit and everything we do in vacation rental activities is we want to be proactive. And we're going to talk about that today. As we talk about carbon monoxide, and you've got some points you wanted to share with us, and then a case study where now we didn't really have proactive things in place, and there was some fatalities. But before we do that, we talk about carbon monoxide, and it's certainly an exposure that's in some of our vacation rentals. But we also talk about detectors and alarms. So we have smoke detectors, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors and alarms. So really, what is the difference between a detector and then an alarm?
Well, that's a good question. The main difference is that a detector has something that detects either smoke or carbon monoxide. But the difference between a detector and alarm is the alarm also has a detector and will make a noise or notify the people in the immediate space that there's a problem. Now, the detectors will notify somebody, like if you're in a hotel at the front desk, that there's a problem, while the alarms notify, essentially in the room itself. So that's kind of the main difference. The alarms actually have a sound to them.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so most of the time in vacation rentals, we have smoke alarms, and we have carbon monoxide alarms that are detecting in the space we're in and alarming in the space that we're in, which is really what we need. Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah,
it depends on the application, right? And for sure, in a residential setting, you definitely need one that alarms in the room itself.
Right. And then if we're in some urban areas where there's high-rise condominiums, there may be the alarms in the unit and then detectors out in the hallway that may provide some type of, you know, detection alert to the staff in the building.
Yeah, you would have you would have an alarm kind of inside, a detector inside, like say a residence or a hotel room or something like that. And then you'd have the notification appliance, which is the actual thing that makes the noise in the hallway, but it would be loud enough for them to hear inside that space. So yeah, and also detectors typically have somebody, like if you're at a hotel, monitoring that those alarms. So they would see a flash at the front desk, or they would be able to be notified that something is going on.
Right. Good. So technically we got, just to be clear about what we have. So most of the time we have alarms and we want these here, and so that they can detect these potential hazardous situations. In this case, we're going to talk about carbon monoxide, but you said there was 3 points we wanted to cover around these devices. So what would be the first one?
Well, I also did want to, excuse me, talk about smoke alarms.
Okay. So
one of the things that I see fairly often is the inappropriate placement of smoke alarms in, especially rental properties, and the inappropriate numbers. So if you have a rental property, you should have a smoke alarm in every bedroom where anybody sleeps. You should have a smoke alarm or one or more smoke alarms in the living spaces. You may, depending on the type of property, you may have one in the kitchen. But what I often see is that a lot of properties may have only one smoke alarm protecting the entire property. And that may be in the central living room area or den, but really you need to have one in every sleeping room and in the hallways. And also they need to be up high. We often see these, if you have a 20-foot or 16-foot ceiling, I often see them placed at 8 foot. Well, if they're placed at 8 foot, they won't give you a smoke alarm. The alarm will not alarm until the room is mostly filled with smoke. So you want to avoid that. You want it to alarm when the smoke is at the highest point, to give those inside the maximum opportunity to get out of the residence. And that also is true for multifamily homes, condominiums, and things like that, apartments. Okay. So the correct number and placement, and often see that they don't do both very often.
And then typically that information is in the package when we purchase these. The instructions on where to locate them is with the smoke alarm itself.
Oh well, they should be, but there's other kind of codes and standards that will dictate where a smoke alarm should be. So when you purchase a smoke alarm, it probably will say, you need to have one smoke alarm in every bedroom. You need to have one in the living rooms, and you might, usually they're not in bathrooms if the bathroom is fairly small. And typically they're not in kitchens, but it depends on the space. But yeah, there will be some instructions, but you can also refer to your local fire department, and they can help you place those or provide you with information on how to get those placed.
Okay, good. So proper placement is having them, and then in the right space, and then properly working.
Yeah, and in the right location with the space, and properly working, of course. Yeah, so that's something we see for smoke alarms in these types of buildings.
Okay. And then some of the things around carbon monoxide that you've found in some of your investigations, whether they're like risk assessments for buildings or, I want to say apartments or hotels. I mean, I think it would apply to vacation rentals as well. There's a couple of things you want to mention here.
It does apply to vacation rentals. So one of the aspects of, if you have a gas appliance in any type of building, you really should have carbon monoxide alarms. So that, because carbon monoxide is a gas that's developed by the process of burning. So if you're burning gas, you're developing at least some level of carbon monoxide. When everything's working perfectly, we have the flame, and then we have something heated up, say like water in a water heater, and then we have the gases going up and out of the building, and then it's no problem. But sometimes the exhaust supply, or the ability to exhaust those gases, gets interfered with somehow, or the ability to provide fresh air. So one thing we know also is that all flames require oxygen, which is fresh air. And so we need air to supply oxygen for the burning. And then we need the burning to get out safely out of the building. So there's really two types of two types of ventilation. One is the ventilation required to provide the fresh combustion air. And the other is the ventilation required to remove once it's burned, those gases from the space. So sometimes we see that the combustion air or the fresh air supply doesn't exist, and they're just using air from within the space. And most times most of the time, I'm not going to say it's okay, but most of the time there's no problem, doesn't develop a problem in the space, except when you might be having a lot of people taking a shower, as you might have in a vacation rental. And then that water heater runs for a very, very long time. And then you have carbon monoxide buildup in the space. The other thing we see is sometimes the venting is just not done properly. Like those vents that exhaust the combustion gases, the hot gases that come out of the water heater or furnace, sometimes are only vented into the attic when they really need to be vented totally outside from the space. And that also can create a problem when you have, well, anytime, but especially if you have a lot of people using those appliances. And then, of course, along with that comes maintenance. So anytime you do maintenance on your, gas appliance, you need to make sure that those exhausts are maintained and that they're never interfered with and even replaced if they have any signs of corrosion or anything like that. And that's why we want to use, licensed plumbers to do that type of work, so that we're following the rules to make sure we don't hurt anybody. So, as far as gas appliances, if you have a gas appliance of any type in any property, you need to have carbon monoxide alarm detection and alarm. And what we've seen with carbon monoxide alarms is that they look very similar to the smoke detectors. So we've seen people actually silence an alarming carbon monoxide alarm because they think it's a smoke detector, but it's a smoke alarm, but really it's a carbon monoxide alarm that's telling them that there's carbon monoxide in the space. So we need to be cognizant of where we install carbon monoxide alarms, and we don't want them to look like they're a smoke alarm because people just don't know the difference, and we want them to be able to take essentially emergency actions if they need to, and be aware of what's going on, and that interferes with that. So those are the main three things I wanted to talk about that I've seen in these spaces. I will talk about essentially two case studies that I've investigated where people were killed due to carbon monoxide.
So before we go to the case study, so basically, the 2 points that you brought up, just about the gases, carbon monoxide is a byproduct of combustion. So we want that and the other gases to leave. But if we don't vent them properly or maintain those vents, we're going to have a problem. The second point was, so basically to have a proper ignition of our gas appliances, we need to have a good air amount of supplied air to go ahead and make the combustion. Because once again, we could have incomplete combustion, which could generate carbon monoxide or even the natural gas itself to be emitted out into the space.
Yeah. And one of the problems with incomplete combustion is it may not draft. So the when these gases heat up due to combustion, it creates buoyancy, and then it heats the exhaust essentially duct up, and that drafts. So it starts to pull those gases out. If you have incomplete combustion, it interferes with the process of drafting. So it kind of compounds that problem. So we really want to make sure that we maintain our ventilation.
Yeah. And then you also mentioned about placement of carbon monoxide alarms. So what's the best locations to place carbon monoxide alarms?
So it's not as, carbon monoxide alarm placement is not the same as smoke alarm placement.
Right.
So you can place carbon monoxide alarms kind of lower, or, they make plug-in types that go into an outlet.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so you can plug them in an outlet that's low to the ground, or you can plug them in the kitchen that, on top of the countertop, or really anywhere. And you don't need as many carbon monoxide alarms as you do smoke alarms typically, because carbon monoxide tends to fill the space. But where you have sleeping rooms, you want carbon monoxide alarms in those rooms.
Okay, yeah, because it's going to kind of go from the floor up, and then so we would place these lower, essentially. Like,
Well, carbon monoxide is about the same specific gravity as air, so it mixes really well. So it doesn't go up or down, but it is. It does do that, but not in a real, I
dramatic
guess,
effect.
dramatic fashion.
Yeah.
It mixes very well in the space because just of the vapor pressure of the carbon monoxide. But what's really important is the ability to detect it quickly, because as quickly as possible, because you can't smell it. You can't see it and you can't taste it. So it's they call it the silent killer, and it is a big problem. And I'll talk about these two case studies.
Yeah, and so it's also wintertime right now. So, we may be finding that we're going outside in some of our vacation rentals, and we've created these kind of outdoor indoor spaces, and we have these portable heaters, I call them, and they're gas fired typically, or propane fired, and even though we're outside, and it's we still have to be cautious about these devices, because they're also going to produce carbon monoxide.
Absolutely, and these types of burners tend to produce quite a bit more carbon monoxide than the burner of a water heater, for example. So we need to be really careful and provide that fresh air and also the combustion air that allows the carbon monoxide to leave whatever space we're burning those in. And those are not designed to be enclosed whatsoever,
Right.
those burners.
Exactly. So some areas may enclose them, and others, just because we're outside, they're generating more carbon monoxide than we would normally see. So this is something else to be cautious with. We're having like outdoor parties or outdoor gatherings with these large heaters during the winter.
Well, if you're having those gatherings and where there's a potential to be closed in with one of those heaters, yeah. If it's outside and there's nothing, it's just totally outside, the risk is very, very low. But if you attempt to enclose one of those heaters in the space and then use the heater to heat the space, or just turn the heater on for whatever reason, it's very dangerous. Even like in a garage, every winter we see during ice storms or blizzards or snowstorms, people lose their power. We see carbon monoxide poisonings from people trying to use these types of devices indoors, or these types of burners indoors, and we see several fatalities every winter from this type of thing.
Yeah, that's good to point out. And these are made for outdoor use, and we really shouldn't be having large gatherings anyway with COVID, right? But we don't need
Exactly.
large gatherings and using these inside. That's not good. So great, great points there. Carbon monoxide. So let's review these two case studies that were fatal, and basically where there was not some good proactive work taking place here.
Right. The first case study was a multiple fatality incident that occurred during the Christmas holiday. The families had gone to home for the holidays. They had a bunch of people staying there overnight. They went to a midnight mass. Midnight mass, I think, on Christmas Eve. And what happened is they were all taking their showers. The water heater was used for a very long period of time, and the water heater had been vented into the attic, and not outside of the house. So the water heater was used for a long time, and those people ended up not making it to the mass. And the next morning, they also didn't make it to the Christmas mass, where they were expected at both. And so people went to check on them, and they found several of them unconscious, and 3 of them, had died. And so the reason that the carbon monoxide got into the house it's very complex, but the main reason is the water heater was in the pantry, and it didn't have fresh air supply. So it just used air from inside the house to power the burner, to provide oxygen for the burner. And then when they had installed it, whoever had installed it previously had installed the termination of the exhaust into the attic space. Well, what happened is they kept using that for a long time, so the gases were going up into the attic space, and as they cooled and they were no longer hot, they were coming down into through cracks, and through vents and things like that around the lights, coming down into the living space. So the people in the house were breathing that. They didn't know they were breathing that, and they had been breathing it for some time. When the fire department finally got there, after about 1 p.m. the next day, the carbon monoxide level in the house was still 1,100 parts per million, which is very, very high. And so
most detectors are set at 10, right, Mike? 10 parts per million to activate.
Not the ones that are not the alarms that we use in residences, not the the CO alarms like that. If we use it in a factory or in for example, a chemical plant, we use lower levels. But in the homes, I think they're set for, they integrate over time. So you have to reach a certain amount, a certain concentration over time, but it's far, far less than 1,100. It's lower than, I think it's 50 ppm for 2 hours, and then that signals an alarm.
Okay.
Or a higher amount for a shorter period of time. So regardless, I guess you'd say the root cause of this incident was the water heater didn't have a fresh air supply that was from outside. It used the combustion air from the house to burn the fuel. And then it vented directly into the attic and didn't go through the roof to the outside. I think it's a little more complex than that, but at the end of the day, that's the problem. And the sad part about all this is that they just installed a new water heater about 3 months before, and the company that installed it did not install it up to code. So their code required them to go through the ceiling and exit it to the outside, and also to provide fresh air at the bottom of the water heater for the flame. And neither of them were installed by the person that installed it. So, we had 3 people died, and then the tragic, adding to the tragedy is those that did not die actually had long-term brain damage due to lack of oxygen. So we had a very severe incident that probably a $200 investment on the front end could have prevented entirely. So
no alarms, right, in the space? No carbon monoxide alarms in the space?
They did not have carbon monoxide alarms. But I want to that's a great question. Just because you have a carbon monoxide alarm doesn't mean that you can not ventilate correctly.
Correct.
Because sometimes the carbon monoxide builds up so fast that the alarm can't detect it fast enough to actually signal an alarm. So we've seen that also, where the carbon monoxide built up so fast and the alarm did not actually turn on. So people didn't know that. That's an actual separate case study, but I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah. So proper installation by the right people is necessary. In this case, I guess they thought they had it and they didn't.
Well, they paid a company to install it, so they really didn't know that it wasn't done the right way, right? So they would, but the company knew. Well, the company that installed it knew, but they just didn't do it. I guess they, I'm not going to opine on why or think about why they might have done it that way, but they did not do it correctly.
Yeah. Okay.
The second essentially case study occurred in a multifamily property. And what happened was this multifamily property had a pool, and they had a pool heater. Where it was located is very cold in the winter. And so what happened is, it's very cold in the winter, but the pool was on an interior pool that was operational year round. So it was heated year round, and people used it year round. I'm going to start off with what happened first, and then we'll go back to why it happened. So in the morning, the cleaning ladies at this multifamily, the cleaning service, found two people unconscious in their unit. They called essentially 911. The 911 came, took them to the hospital. The couple died some 90 or 120 days later because they never regained consciousness after they found them. But what's interesting about this case, and it's very tragic, is several other tenants had told the front desk that, hey, the smoke alarms are going off. The smoke alarms are having a problem. There's no smoke, but we do know the smoke alarms are going off, so they silenced them. And they notified, essentially the person who was at the site, I guess the general manager or the assistant manager of the site. The sad part about this is if the manager had been educated enough to understand that it was actually a carbon monoxide alarm that was alarming, they couldn't hear, see, or smell or taste what was in the air. And these were in different units, so different units down the hall and even different units on a different floor. But the manager didn't have the appropriate training to understand that there's a problem. So she just told them to take out the batteries and, no problem. Well, and that decision right there kind of sealed the fate of the two people that died. Now, that's a real simplification of what happened. But essentially, we have carbon monoxide that was emitted from the pool heater that, went up the walls and into another space and killed those two people. There were several other, people that were affected in the building that a couple of them silenced their alarms, and then that wasn't recognized as a problem. But if we get back to the root cause, that's where I told you before that, just because you have an alarm doesn't mean you're protected from carbon monoxide.
Right.
So the real root cause of this particular incident was that the manager of the actual building was not maintaining the pool heater correctly, was not maintaining the both the fresh air vent required for complete combustion and the exhaust ventilation vents that were to remove gases from the space. So we're going to start with maintenance. We don't know exactly how this happened, but the orifice that provided fresh air to the heater had been changed to using an orifice from a different heater. That resulted in this particular heater producing more carbon monoxide than usual, and it reduced. And talked about what you talked about earlier. It was incomplete combustion, which was generating more types of gases, more water vapor, and more carbon monoxide. And that had been happening for some time. So what happened was the vents had been corroded. The vents that had been removing the gases had holes in them due to rust. And this rust is visible, so anybody could have noticed that went in that room and said, hey, we've got a problem here, if they had just an ounce of education in this area that we're talking about. So in addition to not maintaining the exhaust vent, because this area was in a very cold location, the manager had affixed a door to the fresh air vent to close it. And that fresh air vent was very large, and it was supposed to stay open year round. But because it was cold, he actually thought that he was doing something good by closing it to save energy. Well, what he did there was he cut off the fresh air supply. And so now we increased the amount of incomplete burning, right? So then we further increased carbon monoxide, water vapor, and other gases. And that prevented, all those things together prevented essentially the carbon monoxide from getting out of the space. So the carbon monoxide was trapped in the room, and it went and permeated throughout the building through imperfections in the building. And so that's really where, in that particular case, he was using his own staff his own maintenance staff to do the maintenance on the pool heaters and the vents and everything. And they were not trained and educated or licensed. And then we see the outcome of that particular issue. So it's very important to maintain these things, to get them installed correctly, to use licensed professionals to do it.
Yeah, that's really good. Unfortunate situations, but so it's good to understand these devices and how they're operating and how we're potentially generating carbon monoxide. And certainly we want to prevent those things, but then having a carbon monoxide alarm should be helpful. In some cases it may not be, but in this case, education and prevention would have saved a lot of lives.
Yeah, but education for everybody, right? Like, for the maintenance man, for the manager, for the assistant manager who received the call that, hey, you got a smoke detector, a smoke alarming, and there's no smoke. It was actually a carbon monoxide alarm. So even the people that are renting, and then, so it's a big systemic educational piece that needs to happen to protect them. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's good. Unfortunate situations, and we like to be proactive, but sometimes we need to learn from these situations, and hopefully the audience will pick up some of this and go back to their teams or their own properties and do some self-assessment and see what they have.
Yeah.
So thanks, Michael, for that. And basically, as we get ready to wrap up, is there anything, big goals or challenges you have for 2021?
Well, for 2021, I just hope we have enough business for our business to keep going, because 2020 was fairly rough for us, with COVID. So like many people, our goal is to kind of hire more staff and to grow our business. So those are our main goals, and do good while we're doing it.
Great. Yeah. And so if anybody out in the audience wanted to learn more about you and REM risk or REM risk, how would they get in touch with you?
So really the easiest way is to go to our website. It's www.remrisk.com. And they can contact us there, kind of look at the kind of things that we offer for services, and maybe we can help you in some way or answer a question if you need in the future. Great.
All right, Dr. Mike, we appreciate your time today and education on carbon monoxide alarms and prevention, and we appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Eric. I'm happy to be here and enjoyed speaking with you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Safer VR's podcast with Eric Thibodeau. If you enjoy this, I would love you to join my Facebook group, The Safer Vacation Rentals, for more of the same. You can also join our email list at www.safervrs.com.